Okay, let's do a quick activity. Without pausing the video, change something about yourself. We'll give you a couple of seconds to think of something while we do the same thing.
Okay, so we're doing this too?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
What are you going to change?
Take off my watch.
How
about you?
I'm going to take these off.
Okay.
Okay, eyes are adjusting. Now, we put you on the spot, but chances are pretty good that you took something off. Like I did my glasses, Claire did her watch, a ring, maybe you put your pen down. Most people perceive change as a loss. It's pretty rare to find people that perceive that change will actually add or improve things. To properly care for our stakeholders, we need to understand who they are and we need to understand their perspectives. Thinking this through early in the project is the only way to have a successful implementation in the end.
If we studied a group of people to understand human height, we'd see a pattern like this. If we lined them up from shortest to tallest, we'd see this shape. Very few on the extremes and the majority clustered around the center. We'll learn more about this shape in the measure phase of DMAIC. The interesting thing is that if we're studying a group of people and their perspectives on change, we would expect to see the same pattern. We would expect about 15% of the people to have a negative perspective on change, about 70% to be neutral, and the remaining 15% or so totally in favor of change. And don't get me wrong, we're not saying that short people hate change. The point is that anytime we're working to improve something, it means that we intend to make some changes. All improvement requires change, but as the people on the left side of this picture will tell you, not all change is an improvement. This matters because when you're starting a project, you need to be highly in tune with those people who you will rely on to make the improvement a reality. When you make changes, it will require some people to do some things differently, and they know this, and they've probably seen it done poorly before. So from the very beginning, a process improvement team must first identify who are our stakeholders and what are their perspectives on changing the process.
A simple target style diagram can be used for the team to initially identify who the stakeholders are for this project. The short project name goes in the center of the target. The ring closest to the center is where we capture those stakeholders or stakeholder groups who are closest to the project. These are the decision makers, the ones who can make or break the project. These are usually leaders in the organization or internal customers. To clarify a couple common mistakes, end customers are never considered stakeholders. Customers are much bigger than a stakeholder. The next layout represents stakeholders who are not necessarily decision makers. They won't make or break the project, but they can have an influence on the project direction. These are usually subject matter experts or SMEs, or people who are heavily involved with the process and will certainly influence whether the project is successful or not. The last level identifies those stakeholders who may not have input into the decisions that the team makes, and they are not big influencers. However, they will likely be affected by the change or improvement in the process. These are people who may have to do something differently in the new process.
When the teams identified the stakeholders and placed them in the appropriate ring on the diagram, the next step is to assess the current perspective of each with regard to the project. This is not a scientific assessment, and it's also not an emotional activity, but it's a necessary early step to determine how to best work with the stakeholder. The team will discuss each stakeholder or stakeholder group, and using their current knowledge, they'll identify the stakeholder as either supportive, neutral, or negative. The team won't always know the current perspective of every stakeholder, and when they don't, it's an action item for someone to find out.
Supportive means that they support the decision to prioritize this project and that they will actively support the team with tasks, resources, or collaboration. Negative means that they are actively against the work of the project team or that they have demonstrated that they do not intend to cooperate with the project. A neutral perspective indicates that they are neither negative nor particularly supportive. These are the "I'll believe it when I see it" or "this wasn't my idea" people.
Our premise is always that if the stakeholder currently has a negative perspective, then they have a good reason for that. Most people who are not in support of a change have a fear of us breaking something important along the way, or making changes without enough information from people who work inside the process every day and who truly know how it works. They've likely been through change before, where if they were included in the discussions, they would have been able to provide some key info to prevent failures. So once the team has identified the current view, the next step is to identify the desired view. Now, every stakeholder doesn't have to be a cheerleader for the project. We don't need 100% of our stakeholders to be supporters. Sometimes neutral is fine. If we have a critical stakeholder who's currently negative, and the team agrees that we need them to be supportive, then the team has some work to do. And similarly, if we have a stakeholder exactly where we need them to be, then the team has to determine how to keep them there and not lose support.
So pulling these concepts together, the team will create something that looks like this. Stakeholders identified on stickies. And where the team had knowledge, they have used a minus, a zero, and a plus signs to indicate the current and desired perspectives. For example, looking in the decision maker's ring, we can now see that all of the critical stakeholders are currently neutral, but the team agrees that they need to be supportive. Looking at the outer ring, those affected by the project, we see two stakeholders who are currently supportive, and the team would like to keep them there. When identifying stakeholders, typically the further out you go in the diagram, you are more likely to be dealing with groups rather than individuals. But when can you group stakeholders together? The whole objective of this activity is for us to ultimately create a plan to communicate with and engage our stakeholders. So if we have a group of 10, let's say customer care reps, and they all reasonably share the same perspective, then we can group them together as a stakeholder group, just like they did in this example. However, if we have multiple perspectives within that group, then we'll want to separate them out.
With the raw work done, the next step is to transfer the whiteboard data to the stakeholder plan template. This is a two-part template. Page 1 is a summary, a list of all the project stakeholders, and then page 2 is where we capture specific messages for each. We'll create a compelling case using data, examples, and context that's meaningful for the stakeholder. In your workbook, you'll see a full picture of this template. Let's walk through the elements now.
On page 1, you'll notice light green fields. These fields have drop-down lists to easily make your selection. Light yellow fields indicate that it's a free-form field. The fields on this form are stakeholder name, relation to the project. The options are decision maker, influencer, or affected. Current view, that's negative, neutral, or supportive. And desired view.
Drawbacks and opportunities is a place to capture the team's summary of how this project may affect the stakeholder. What are the drawbacks if this project is not successfully completed? What are the opportunities if it is? This may take some research and some thought to understand the perspective of this stakeholder, but it's a critical step to ensure that your project has the best chances of success.
Strategy identifies the high-level plan for creating alignment with a stakeholder. The options follow the PAINT acronym, that is, persuade, appeal, for example, appeal to their ideals, values, visibility, ambition, etc. Involve, negotiate, for example, trade their time for something of value that you can offer, or tell. Tell means that we just tell the stakeholder how it's going to be. This is the least effective, but is sometimes the most appropriate. For example, if there's an urgent safety or legal issue, negotiating or appealing wouldn't be a very good approach.
And the last element is vehicle. We've identified a broad strategy, but the vehicle gets a little more specific. Options are formal updates, informal updates, shared documentation, or involve in relevant team meetings. With this information populated by the team for all critical stakeholders, we can now move on to developing specific messages for each.
Before we move to part 2 of the template, we'd like to discuss the importance of creating intentional messages for each stakeholder group. Spending the time up front to engage your stakeholders is so much better, more efficient and more effective than waiting until the time when you're ready to implement your new solutions. Considering the experiences, the assumptions, the preferences, and the knowledge of your stakeholders will allow you to have a much higher quality of communication.
With the summary form completed, the team can continue to create the initial communication or message to each stakeholder. You can consolidate your messages as long as the stakeholders have the same point of view or perspective. This form provides the prompts to create a meaningful message targeted specifically to the stakeholder. The ability to get others in the organization to be enthusiastic about your project is a key to success, and our advice is to start building support early.
And your 1-point lesson for the stakeholder plan walks through the high-level steps to complete the summary and detailed level of info. As you may have already wondered, your stakeholder management plan is a confidential team document and should not be shared outside of the team. And we have to be sensitive and diplomatic when using the information. For example, we don't just go up to someone and say, "Hey, our team has identified you as a major negative stakeholder, and we want to know how to get you to the positive. Can I buy you a drink?" It's really a helpful method when used properly, not like that. Like all other Lean Six Sigma tools, as the saying goes, a fool with a tool is still a fool.
Oh, good one.